Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Patrick Flynn with Tailwind Placement Exams, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, 5 Things You Need to Know About Placement Testing, and the subject today is standardized writing tests. It's 1:55. We have 5 minutes before we get started. I just wanted to welcome those of you who are out there, and we'll get started here briefly. Thanks very much for your attendance, and we hope you enjoy it.
Particular software program they're running. And then all of these variables are thrown into a big regression analysis to identify, a very small number of variables, 4 or 5 variables, for example, that when used together, best predict the scores that the essays received when they were scored by humans. What is really interesting here, though, is that the variables that are considered by the computer algorithm tend to be these surface-level, countable variables, things like average sentence length, number of paragraphs, counts of subject-verb disagreements, the average number of syllables per word, count of numbers of transitional words, or use of low-frequency vocabulary, that sort of thing. Scoring algorithms can also do things like identify the words or maybe a short phrase, those types of sentence constructions, for example, those things that are most predictive of each of the possible essay scores. But what none of the variables do is measure whether or not the essay actually discusses the topic of interest in an intelligent and a coherent way. The closest thing that automated essay scoring does to assess if an essay is on topic is going to be a keyword analysis to make sure that the essay contains some of the vocabulary that we might expect to see in an essay of that topic. But it's not actually assessing whether or not the words are being used correctly, or perhaps the essay is on topic, but it's just not using that vocabulary. None of the automated essay scoring software can determine, for example, if examinees are giving a well-reasoned response, if the sentences are strung together in a logical and coherent manner, whether the paragraphs, all cover one central idea, if an adequate explanation is given for the ideas that are presented, or whether the examinee's writing is on topic, is the question, actually covered.
The second point is that writing tests give students complete control over the skills and forms they choose to show you. When you ask students to write an essay, you really are turning control of the test or the assessment over to them. If a student knows that they're weak in certain areas of writing, they could potentially craft an essay response in such a way as to avoid showing you those areas of writing in which they're weak. And it's problematic if it happens to be an element or a component of writing that you are actually interested in assessing, or that you feel is important for determining correct placement into college composition courses or English courses. If a student's response does not contain certain elements of writing or forms of composition that you deem to be important, then you actually have no data or no way of assessing their ability level in those particular areas of writing. On the other hand, if you just multiple choice assessment, this now gives the test writer or the person who is the one administering the exam complete control over what content areas are assessed and how important each of those content areas are. So this is a sample test blueprint for a writing mechanics assessment. And here, as the test developers, we've identified the elements of writing that we feel are important for determining accurate placement into college-level English courses. And every student who receives this exam is going to be assessed on all of these content areas. With an essay test, it really would be possible for some students to write an essay response without addressing some of these content areas, and then we would not have complete information with which to assess their writing skills. So using a multiple choice test with a corresponding test blueprint like this not only gives us control over what content we are assessing and measuring, but it also helps to standardize our decision-making processes.
The third point is that standardized writing can easily identify the really poor writers, but is less successful at distinguishing good writers from mediocre writers. So with this, think again about the types of variables that are measured by these automated essay scoring algorithms, right? So these are things like word counts, average number of syllables, subject-verb errors, numbers of, comma splices, whatever. These are very simple markers, which tend to boil down to little more than just a tabulation of the number of mistakes that are made. So, with that in mind, people who just totally lack command and can't construct a complete sentence are going to commit a lot of errors. So we can identify them easily. But distinguishing between good and mediocre writing often isn't a question of the writing being wrong or right, or having errors or not having errors. The variables measured, they're not capturing tone or style. They're not assessing or evaluating various literary techniques. They're not capturing the vividness of one's expression, the logic of the argument, the effectiveness of analogies and examples and that sort of thing. So all those nuances that distinguish good writing from writing that's only so-so really aren't assessed by the scoring models. But furthermore, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but standardized writings tend to be really short, and good writing takes time. So many of the elements of good writing that we see in students' work when they're actually given an appropriate amount of time just simply isn't present in their timed writing. So those writing tasks then just aren't capable of accurately measuring or accurately distinguishing writing at the high end.
The next point is that validity evidence for automatic graded writing tests is not actually validity, but reliability evidence. So there's an argument that's often made to support the use of automatic graded writing tests, and that is that the scores that a student receives that are assigned by the computer grading system or the automatic grading system are the same as the scores that they were assigned if human graders were to grade their essay. And this argument is used as evidence for the validity of the writing assessment. However, this is not actually validity evidence, but rather reliability evidence. So reliability is the ability to consistently assign test scores or measurement repeatability. So if the same score is assigned using the automatic grading system as is assigned using a human grader, then what we have is evidence of reliability or consistency in assigning test scores. And don't get me wrong, it's definitely important to have a reliable measure. You're never going to hear me say that you should have an unreliable measure. But the psychometric property with which we're most concerned is validity, or whether or not that we're making correct interpretations from the test scores. A test can actually be reliable without being valid. So we can assign scores consistently to individuals, but we could be making incorrect interpretations from those scores. Or in other words, I could be measuring something consistently, but it could be the wrong thing that I'm measuring or the wrong trait that I'm measuring. On the other hand, we know that a test must first be reliable in order to be valid. If we can't consistently assign scores to test takers, then we can't ensure that we're measuring the correct trait. So because this argument is essentially evidence of reliability rather than validity, we really feel that the validity evidence of automatic graded writing tests is overstated. What we really have is simply an argument based on face validity. And face validity is assessed simply by looking at an assessment and determining if it appears to be measuring your construct of interest. So in this case, does the writing assessment appear to be measuring writing? Of course it does. But true validity evidence requires much more rigor and gathering multiple points of evidence to show that your instrument is truly predictive of college-level writing, which brings us to our final point.
Right, so this builds on what Sonia was just saying, which is that standardized writing has this face validity, right? It seems like, the best way to know whether or not students can write is to ask them to write. But the reality is that it turns out to be unpredictive of college writing, and we can't simply assume that a test is valid because it looks like it's valid or because we think that it should be valid. Standardized writing tests actually are a perfect example of why you can't do that, because the test actually doesn't measure what we think it measures. What we found here is that tests, multiple choice tests like the Tailwind English placement test, those sorts of assessments that thoroughly measure the building blocks of good writing are actually highly predictive of college writing, but standardized writing tests are not. And let me explain why I say this. So we did a research study here a few years ago in which we collected actual writing samples from students taking a freshman level course on the Wisconsin experience. So, what does it mean to be a citizen in the state of Wisconsin? Now, it's important to note that this wasn't an English class, right? It was just a regular class that enrolled students from all across campus. But what we were evaluating really was an actual writing assignment that was issued by their instructor. It was graded in that course by their teacher. So we know that it was a legitimate example of the sort of writing that students submit as part of their college coursework. We weren't actually interested in the grades that the instructor gave, because I'm not sure what the instructor's criteria were. We were interested in that as a measure of writing. So we actually brought in two groups of faculty from across campus, and all of these faculty were involved in teaching our general education communications courses. And we worked with that first group of faculty to develop a scoring rubric that we could use to assess the extent to which any writing sample provided evidence that the general education essential learning outcomes for communications in written communication were actually satisfied. And we then worked with the second group of faculty, and this was a group of 17 faculty members, to read through these student essays and evaluate them with respect to the rubric. And every essay, we randomly assigned the essays in a way that every essay was graded by 5 different people. And when we got done with that, we computed the average score, and we correlated that average rating with test scores from our placement test, as well as test scores from the ACT and SAT standardized writing test, which we require as part of our admissions process. What we found was that the multiple choice test, the Tailwind EPT, had a large and significant correlation, whereas the writing tests, and you can see I'm including the AP language test here because that's also predominantly a measure of standardized writing. They all had low correlations, and all of them were not even statistically significant, which means that they weren't even statistically different from 0. So this all, I think, probably begs the question. I know Sonia and I have been talking about some of the maybe not so obvious problems with standardized writing, but looking at these correlations, I mean, why might this be the case? And we've come up with a few reasons that we think should lead us to not be that surprised, actually, at this pattern of results. The first is that with standardized writing tasks, students are really disengaged with the topic. So in college, the students are never just given some generic topic and asked to write. They're asked to read material, listen to lectures, engage in conversations with, their other students and TAs and all that. They may even be asked to develop their own topic. But even if they're given one, it's after having spent a good deal of time familiarizing themselves with the material, forming their opinions, and thinking about it critically. The second one is that these standardized writings are very short, right? I mentioned this earlier. So we know with an actual assignment, students spend hours working on those assignments, and they probably spend a good deal more time just pulling their thoughts together, thinking about their writing as they're, walking to class, as they're, doing whatever. So it's just a long process. These tests, though, are usually like 30 to 45 minutes. And that's inclusive of all their reading and planning time. So there's very little time to be thoughtful or creative. It's basically just enough time to brain dump everything that they're thinking about a topic. And there really isn't time for them to actually engage in good writing strategies. They're just trying to get their thoughts on paper in a way that's grammatical. And then the last one here, which I think is most important, actually, is the fact that standardized writing doesn't actually allow students to engage in the one part of the writing process that the English faculty will tell you is the most important, and that's revision. There isn't time to be writing and rewriting, to move stuff around, to try out different ways of saying something, to consider what they should say or what they shouldn't say. There's barely enough time to read over, what they've already written, to proofread it, just to make sure that they didn't make stupid mistakes, which, I don't know how you are. I know when I write, I do this all the time. I start writing a sentence, I sort of change course mid-sentence, and I wind up writing a sentence that isn't even grammatical because I'm trying to do sort of two things. They may not even have time to read through and catch those types of silly errors. So this is a tough pill for English faculty to swallow, that standardized writing tests don't measure what they think they measure. But the reality is that that these tests do very poorly at predicting actual college writing and do significantly less well than do multiple choice tests. So with that, we've wrapped up our top 5 things that you need to know about placement tests as they relate to standardized writing tests. And I'm hoping at this point, Patrick, that maybe some people have jumped in with some questions, and Sonia and I'd be happy to take those.
Very good. We actually do have a couple of questions here. First question, all the points you made seem to be in reference to writing tests written by major testing organizations. At my campus, our faculty have developed their own, which the English department grades themselves. Is that sort of an assessment better?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one, or at least I'll start with this one. So two things sort of immediately come to mind for me. The first is that I think it really depends on the type of assessment that you're delivering locally. So, I've mentioned this time component, right, and the fact that standardized tests are usually, 30 to 45 minutes. If your campus were actually to give a 1.5 to 2 hour writing assessment, right, well, that's obviously much, much longer. Many of the things that I said before become less serious suddenly. There is more time for students to engage in planning and rereading and editing and all that. So, if you're going to do it, I guess I'd say give your students a good deal of time, more time than you think they actually need, because it does take time. Good writing takes time. But even if you do that, the second thing that I'm sort of thinking about is that you still need to be able to do scoring well. And so, what rubric's being used? How's that rubric developed? Is it really measuring the right things? How many people are involved reading every essay? What type of training is being done? to make sure that they're grading in a way that's consistent with each other, that everyone has the same idea of what's a 2 mean, what's a 3 mean, what's a 4 mean. But that, as Sonia said, I mean, that covers reliability, right? I mean, there's still sort of the question of whether or not these scores actually correlate with their type of writing, and that's, really an empirical question. What we know is that if students aren't given enough time, or if your scoring's unreliable or focusing on the wrong things, then we know it certainly won't correlate. But we don't know that if you give a longer time and can get reliable scores, that still doesn't mean that it's going to correlate. But certainly that would be something to take a closer look at. Sonia, I don't know if I missed anything.
No, I think you hit all my points.
Very good. Question 2. How do I convince my English department to stop doing a writing assessment?
Yeah, I'll take that. That one.
That's all yours.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's probably a question that we get, one of the ones that we get most frequently. Because like Jim said, for a lot of the English faculty, it's a tough pill to swallow to tell them that their standardized writing assessment actually is not assessing writing in the way in which they think it is. And so sometimes it comes down, to talk about all of these points that we've mentioned here, to talk about some of the logistics that Jim just mentioned in the last question, some of the difficulties with grading standardized writing assessments or essay exams, developing a rubric, developing prompts in such a way that they have equal difficulty level so that some students are not advantaged simply because maybe they chose to have the easier writing prompt to respond to. These are all logistics that factor into an essay exam. But sometimes it comes down to actually making them see that the validity evidence really isn't there. To conduct some type of study like the one that Jim mentioned when we were talking about the last point there, looking at how those standardized writing assessments, whether or not they do correlate with actual writing in a first-year composition course or a course that has a heavy writing component in it. And if they still don't want to give up the writing assessment, then quite frankly, it might be better to do it after a student's already been placed into a course, something early on, like first week or two, to give it as an assessment and make sure that it actually mimics the type of writing that we actually expect of our students. Allow them the opportunity to be engaged with the task at hand, with the prompt that is given to them to select their topic on which they want to write. Give them adequate time to actually outline their argument and have a fully develop their thoughts before they put them down. And then allow them the chance to revise, to edit as they're writing, and maybe even respond to feedback once they've received it from the instructor. And so it's not how we traditionally think of a placement test. But doing something like that early on in the semester would also be an excellent way to look at and validate a potential multiple choice placement test that you used to place them into that course. Jim, you have anything else?
No, that's great.
Very good. Before I get to number 3, Sonia and Jim, would you put up the next slide, the one with our contact information, I guess. I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to see all those fun things. I do have another question. If I can't convince my faculty not to use a writing assessment, would it be okay to use it along with a multiple choice test in a multiple measures way?
Good question. Yeah, very good question. So there's a lot of support these days, obviously, for multiple measures. The one caution, and Sonia and I are both advocates of multiple measures, but as with anything else, if you're going to use multiple measures, you have to make sure that you're using them well. And the really important thing to keep in mind with multiple measures is that it is premised on this assumption that the different measures that you're using together are all individually strong measures of different aspects of the construct of interest. In this case, I'm not sure that there's really evidence to suggest that standardized writing tests measure the construct at all. So if you add it to a multiple measure solution, all that's really going to do is introduce noise into your placement process, which is going to make it worse than if you'd used the multiple choice exam all by itself. So it is. I know it's sort of a, it's a popular misconception that a multiple measures framework, that by adding additional information can only improve your decision-making process, and it's just not true. It can also hurt your decision-making process, and if you're using information that's unreliable and that's not in any way, shape, or form related to the construct, then that's basically undoing the good that was done by the other assessment. So if you don't have actual evidence to suggest that standardized writing tests are good measures in and of themselves, which I don't think we have, then I would say that you actually would never want to include it in a multiple measures formula.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Very good. That is the last question that I have here before me at the moment. So if there are no other questions, and there you go, I was going to ask for that. We do have upcoming webinars. October 12th, we'll be discussing cut scores, and October 26th, we'll be discussing fairness. Invitations will go out. More information is on the way. We also want to make sure that you have access to our website, which is tailwindtesting.com. I'll let you know out there are sample items throughout the website, including blueprints, sample tests, and a site so you can demo the exams if you'd like to see a little bit more about that. I'm also pleased to let you know that our technical manual has been posted to our website, so if you'd like to take a look at that, certainly feel free. If you have questions about this webinar, any of the webinars, because they are being recorded and they are being posted out to the website, feel free to drop a note to either Jim or Sonia, and they'll be happy to get back with you as quickly as they can. With that, it's almost the bottom of the hour. We certainly appreciate your time. Thank you very much for attending the webinar today. Jim or Sonia, any last words?
Nothing on our end. Thanks so much for being here, everyone.
With that, thank you all very much for your attendance. We appreciate it very much, and we'll look forward to having you at the next one. Take care.